você disser que eu desafino amor, saiba que isto em mim provoca imensa dor. Só privilegiados têm ouvido igual ao seu. Eu possuo apenas o que Deus me deu. Se você insiste em classificar meu comportamento diante musical, eu mesmo mentindo devo argumentar que isto é bossa nova, que isto é muito natural. O que você não sabe nem sequer pressente é que os desafinados também têm coração. Fotografei você na minha Rolleiflex, revelou-se a sua enorme ingratidão. Só não poderá falar assim do meu amor. Este é o maior que você pode encontrar, viu? Você com a sua música esqueceu o principal, que no peito dos...
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Innovation Fund Showcase, brought to you by the National Fund for Workforce Solutions. We're going to jump straight into the action today, but I just wanted to review a couple points today in case you weren't able to join us yesterday. My name is Kenny Morgan. I'm a program associate at the National Fund for Workforce Solutions. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I will be facilitating the Innovation Fund Showcase. Thank you for joining us today. The goal of the Innovation Showcase is to highlight the work of our 2 cohorts of Innovation Fund grantees. So 2 years ago, with the help of our funders, JP Morgan Chase and Walmart.org, we launched the Workforce Solutions Innovation Fund with the main purpose to fund progressive workforce solutions that test new ideas, have the potential for replication, address equity disparities, or generate systems change opportunities. And throughout this journey, we've learned a lot about what innovation means to our network, and the work of our cohorts has really influenced the culture of innovation at the National Fund and has impacted our evolving definition of innovation. So the National Fund defines innovation as the execution of a new and/or novel idea to address a specific challenge that achieves value for workers, employers, and the community. If you have any questions about how we're defining innovation, put those questions in the chat. Janice did a great overview yesterday that I'm sure she'll also be happy to touch on today. So yesterday we heard from our grantees in Pittsburgh and Detroit, who are a part of our first cohort of Innovation Fund grantees. And today we'll be hearing from our collaboratives in New York and West Alabama. We'll also be getting a sneak preview of the work that's currently underway with our second cohort of grantees in Cleveland and Philadelphia. And throughout the showcase, National Fund staff have also been competing in a creative innovation competition as a way to think outside the box and think about what the fundamental aspects of creativity and innovation are. We've also flipped the script and are having our first cohort of grantees judge the National Fund competition. The judges will be announcing the winners for the 2 creative challenges today at the end of the showcase, so make sure you stay tuned for that. And we will be having time for Q&A at the end of the showcase as well, so please submit any questions you have in the chat box. And without further ado, I will pass it to Emily Dieff, who is the Director of Workforce Development at PHI, and she'll walk us through how they worked on developing career pathways in the direct care workforce in New York.
Thank you so much, Canny. And hello, everybody. As Canny said, my name is Emily Dieff, and I am the Director of Workforce Development with PHI. And just to start with a huge thank you to the National Fund for creating this space and this opportunity for us to share more about our work. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So PHI is an organization that is based in the Bronx, New York, but we work nationally to improve job quality for direct care workers. And when I say direct care workers, I'm speaking specifically of personal care aides, home health aides, and certified nursing assistants. So these are the folks that are on the front lines of caregiving. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the way it crippled our long-term care supports and services delivery system, sort of our national consciousness has really risen about just how essential this workforce is. And yet, because the workforce is made up predominantly of women, people of color, and immigrants, this workforce has been systemically and historically marginalized and undervalued, which has led to pervasive poor job quality. And so PHI takes a 360-degree approach in trying to improve job quality for this workforce. And you'll see here that not only are we working in the field, so we partner with employers, we partner with workers and other stakeholders to design and test new employment and training models, but we're also developing policy research, and we're acting on a local, state, and federal level to shape policy and legislation in ways that support this workforce. And so we know from our work that developing accessible career advancement pathways is one critical strategy for us to strengthen the workforce while also improving quality care outcomes. You go to the next slide, please. And with the generous support of the National Fund, PHI has had the opportunity to do just that. So we have developed an advanced role for home health aides called the Care Integration Senior Aide, or CISA for short. And I love this quote from Marisol because I think it really speaks to the dignity and the respect and the recognition that every single worker deserves, but also really sits at the heart of our model design. So she says, I think the role of the home health aide should be considered just as important as any other healthcare role. Now, because our time together today is relatively limited, I have asked Canny to share a 2-page concept paper with all participants here that goes into greater detail about just what the CISA role is all about, so you can read about it. And it also touches on the various assets that PHI has developed to support this model. But in a nutshell, the CISA role is designed to not only improve direct care job quality, but to also improve quality care outcomes and deliver a financial return for employers. And the way the CISA does this is they act as a bridge between what's happening on a daily basis in the client's home and the client's care team. Now, what's really wild is that a care team is typically made up of therapists, RNs, caseworkers, case managers, social workers, but it doesn't typically include direct care workers. And the thing is that home health aides, those are the folks that are in the home every day that know that client in and out, and they see the warning signs. They see that, a client's clinical or social condition is worsening. And they're often the ones that sit with that knowledge that the care team needs in order to take action to prevent adverse outcomes. And so the CISA is going to work in the home with the home health aide and the client, but they are also a full-fledged member of that care team. So they can act as that bridge and work with the care team to avoid ER visits, to avoid those hospital admissions. And PHI has developed an implementation guide and toolkit for employers to help them think through the considerations they need for implementing this role. We've also developed comprehensive training programs, not only for the CISA, but also for the care team. And then we've also developed a business case methodology to help measure the impact of this role. Next slide, please. So flexible funding in our partnership with the National Fund was absolutely critical to our success and to where we even are today. We experienced significant challenges related to COVID, and I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. But I think what was so important here is that the flexibility gave us permission. It gave us permission to explore and to innovate in ways that not only helped us meet the present moment, but it's also transformed our practices and our thinking moving forward. And I just want to offer one example of this. PHI believes deeply in adult learner-centered teaching principles that center the learner in the room as the expert. Our trainings are engaging, they're interactive, we talk, we're physically moving around, we're in conversation with one another, and we had to totally overhaul our training delivery for online use. And we had to do that without sacrificing our values or our competitive advantage. And so we had every single one of our facilitators go through a certification course to become a certified online training professional, to understand how they can leverage all of their charisma and all of their strengths in a classroom to Zoom. And then we also had to look at every single aspect of our training curriculum, of our learning activities, and ask ourselves, okay, how do we replicate this online? What Zoom functions, what other technology is available for us to still make this engaging? And we also explored iPad rentals because we recognized that there was such a significant technology gap. So can we rent iPads that are already connected to the internet, that are configured for user use, and be able to increase accessibility for direct care workers to these upskilling opportunities? And because of that, we were able to pilot our 5-day CCSA training with a group of home health aides. And the reaction between not only the home health aides, but also the facilitators was like, wow, this went pretty well. Like they were kind of surprised at just how effective it was, because I think for all of them, it was such a new experience. And so that was really affirming for us, particularly as we think about how we can continue to leverage these strategies moving forward. Next slide, please. But as I said, we had a lot of challenges along the way. And I put this slide together intentionally because I felt like these headlines helped to really capture sort of the dire situation that home health aides and employers found themselves in, and the impossible choices that people were being forced to make on a daily basis. So our original intention was to design and test the CCSA model in close collaboration with an employer and with a group of workers. However, I can't stress enough just how throttled employers and workers were because of the pandemic. You know, our sister organization in the Bronx, they are the largest worker-owned home care cooperative in the country. And they were faced with the emotional trauma and the logistical nightmare of making sure that people continued receiving the supports and services in their home that they needed after home health aides were passing from COVID. And so to say that there wasn't the capacity or the bandwidth or the emotional energy available for close collaboration and partnership, I mean, that's an understandable understatement. And if we could go to the next slide. However, this did force us to approach model design in a totally different way. And in the end, I think this helped us to create a more transferable, more portable product. So for example, we typically would work closely with an employer to design an advanced role so that it specifically meets their strategic business and workforce needs. And what we would end up with is a really great advanced role that works for that employer, but it isn't something that you can just airlift and plop down at another employer 3 states away. And so because we didn't have this close partnership, it forced us to say, okay, well, PHI has been working in this field for 30 years. We have been working and exploring advanced roles for that long. What do we already know? What best practices do we know? What lessons have we learned? What data is available to us? What subject matter experts can we talk to help inform what this model needs to be successful? And so we flipped our approach on its head. We started big, we started general and broad. And this allowed us to develop a model that, like I said, it's much more transferable. And then on the back end, what we did is we said, okay, we're going to develop this implementation guide and toolkit that will then walk employers through the questions, the considerations, the recommendations that they need to think through in order to customize that role for themselves. Next slide, please. Now, with our evaluation, whenever PHI does any sort of training intervention, there's a number of evaluation tools that we always use and that we used for the CCSA training pilot. So for example, we use a pre and post test to measure the ways in which someone's knowledge, skills, and attitudes change as a result of their experience in that training. We also have reaction surveys. So that's just to get people's reaction and feedback to their experience in the training. We record our closing learning circle. And we also have processes for facilitators to offer feedback on the actual training content and delivery. I included this quote. I think this course was amazing and should be available for other people. This came out of a reaction survey from the CCSA training, and I love it. Like I always say, like I'm going to put this on the cover of something. I don't know what, but I think it's great. We also developed a business case methodology. So I mentioned this in one of my earlier slides, and this is huge. I can't underscore this enough. The business case methodology is a series of steps that will help employers understand the financial and the intangible impact of this role on their business, on their workforce, and on their consumers. It helps them to identify what is your intended outcome here? What do you want to achieve as a result of the CCSA? And what data do you need to gather along the way to measure the extent to which you achieved those goals? And if you could go to the next slide. The reason that this is so important is because it's closely tied to sustainability. So if we are able to build the evidence base on how this advanced role works, on the positive impacts that it brings to the field, it not only makes the case for the employer to say, hey, you should continue investing in this because look at the impact here. But like I mentioned before, our practice work feeds our policy work. And so if we build this evidence base, we can help make the case to legislators and policymakers on, hey, we have this workforce intervention, we have this strategy that's working, that's making a difference. And maybe this is something that we should invest in on a more systemic, broad level. Now, looking forward, we are trying to secure funding to pilot test and refine this model in partnership with an employer. So we are going to do that. We do want to partner closely with an employer, with a managed long-term care organization to really understand and see this model in action, to see the ways in which it's working, the ways in which it needs to be refined. So in closing, I just want to mention that on the next slide, there is more information about how you can access PHI, how you can learn more about our services, our multimedia library, our workforce database. And then on the very last slide is my personal contact information. So you all will be receiving a copy of these slides. Please feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to talk any more about this. If you can't tell, I really enjoy talking about this. And with that, Candy, I will hand it back over to you and any questions that have come up.
Yes, thank you, Emily. So you touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering, as you think about how the workforce development system has traditionally approached working with employers on advanced role development, could you speak more about what challenges that existing structure presented in terms of impact, sustainability, and scalability?
Absolutely. So I think, like I mentioned, PHI usually would work really closely with an employer, and we put in hours and hours and hours of technical assistance and consulting to support an employer through working through those organizational considerations that need to be in place for this role to be successful. And so we had to think like, okay, if this is going to be scalable, if this is something that we want to see active on a really, across the country on a larger scale, we have to assume that PHI can't put in that same level of technical assistance and consulting every time someone's going to implement this model. And so it really forced us to say, okay, if that's the case, then how can we sort of bottle all of our expertise, all of our recommendations and best practices into this toolkit and empower employers to do that work themselves?
Thank you so much, Emily. All right, now we are going to move into our National Fund Staff Innovation Competition. So for those of you that weren't able to join us yesterday, National Fund staff are going to be competing in 2 creative exercises. So the first one is a dictionary story, where staff had to find a word in the dictionary and then use the word above and below it to create a short story. Or they'll be competing in the paperclip test, which requires staff to find as many uses for a paperclip as possible. And as I mentioned, our first cohort of Innovation Fund grantees is going to be judging this competition. So going first, presenting for her team is Abby.
Thanks, Canny. All right. As Candy mentioned, my name is Abby. I'm a program manager on the Change Systems team. My team for this project included Josh and Janice, and our assignment was the dictionary story. Our interpretation of this prompt was a bit different from the other teams. So without further ado, a dramatic reading. Next slide, please. This is the story of Memo and his journey of self-discovery. Bang, the sound echoed loudly. Hooves pounded the turf and the crowd roared. Memo looked on from the stables, hoping for his opportunity to one day take the reins in the prestigious Ghazi Derby. He felt a light tap on the back of his neck and turned to see his closest friend, Memoir. Memoir lightly whispered, "Remember who you are and why you're here, Memo." Memo racked his brain, but nothing came to him. "Help me, Memoir. I can't remember anything." "Troy, you're here for Troy, remember?" Memoir said in an almost silent whisper. Next slide, please. Memo remembered now. Troy was a world-renowned horse breeder. His prize horse, Barani, had gone missing. And Memo knew that if he wanted to ride to victory in the Ghazi, he needed to make a good impression with Troy. Memo began his search in Barani's stall, and as he dug through the hay, he found a small swatch of cloth with a strange pattern on it. I've seen this pattern before, Memo said to himself, but I don't remember. Don't you? Said Memoir. Remember, Memo, remember it all. I'm trying, but I just can't remember. Help me, Memoir. Dannon, remember? Memoir whispered. Dannon, of course. Kane Dannon is Troy's biggest rival, Memo thought to himself. Memo stealthily crept into Dannon's stable and searched for Barani. He made his way from stall to stall, finally seeing Barani at the back of the stable. Her glistening pale white hair sparkled in the afternoon sun. Next slide, please. As Memo approached, he was cut off by Anthony Callis, a harness racer for Dannon. Hey, you, what are you doing in here? This is the private stables of Kane Dannon, Callis called out to Memo. I'm with the Jockey Club, doing a routine inspection, Memo sheepishly replied. Look, guy, I don't got all day. Do you have some identification? If not, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave, Callis said. Memoir's silent whisper creeped into Memo's head. Remember yourself. Remember your mission. Memo reached into his pocket, balled his fist and said, oh, my ID? I have it right here. Whack. Memo punched Callis in the face, knocking him to the ground. Memo made a break for Barani's stall, and as he turned, Memo felt a sharp pain in his chest and collapsed to the ground. Remember who you are, Memoir whispered somberly. Darkness and silence surrounded him. Memo opened his eyes, but was blinded by the sun. Sound began creeping back into his ears, but he was surprised to hear the high-pitched clangs of metal on metal and the screaming of men. I remember now, Memo said to himself. Memo wiped his eyes and looked around to find himself surrounded by a great battle. Memo remembered the wild-eyed warrior charging at him, plunging a dark blue blade into his chest. Next slide, please. As Memo lay dying in a pool of his own blood, he looked up at the warrior Achilles, who leaned forward to whisper, Mighty King Memnon of Athiops, it is here you die. Your armies will suffer your fate as well. And as the pale horse of death took hold, the mournful whisper of Memoir echoed loudly. I told you to remember. Why didn't you remember? Okay, that's the end of our story and our response to the prompt. As you may have picked up, our 3 words for this challenge were Memnon, Memo, and Memoir. Memnon was king of Ethiopia who brought his army to Troy's defense in the Trojan War. We got a little bit meta, as you can see, and Memo, which we defined as an informal record. In our story, it's the last moments of King Memnon before he is slain in the Trojan War. And Memoir is Memo's subconscious memory trying to revive him. This is our nonfiction narrative. We had a number of other symbols in the story, and we really derived inspiration primarily from the death of King Memnon. Our main challenge really was with the execution of the prompt. Janice did have a paper dictionary, which was great because Josh and I did not. And we noticed, though, that sequential listings in the dictionary were often variations of a single word. So we quickly pivoted in our discussion to really discuss the story concept, throwing out ideas, including having the words themselves be characters in our story. Next slide, please. The discussion was really organic. Our ideas were flowing and evolving really smoothly and it was through this discussion of concepts that the word memo came up, and we looked up the surrounding words in the dictionary, memoir and memnon, and from there our story really took form. Our process really, I believe, displays that innovation isn't linear and that creativity is a crucial component. We had a lot of fun with this, and we're very open with each other and really kept open minds as to what this prompt could look like. Janice, Josh, anything else to add?
Did a great job, Abby. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. I love a dramatic reading, and it was perfect. Just the drama that we needed. All right, and presenting for the next team for the paperclip test, the team members were Alexis Graves, Michaela Romero, and Holly Marston. And presenting for their team is Michaela Romero and Holly Marston.
Michaela?
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Canny. So we were tasked with the paperclip challenge. If we could go to the next slide, please. And we'll kind of get to the discussion questions as we go along in our presentation. So what we discussed is we came together with all our ideas and ideas of what paperclips can be used for. And then we noticed certain categories of uses. And the first category was kind of ways to use it as is, so you don't alter it. We listed a few here when really like the uses for paperclip as is are kind of very expansive under all these categories actually. So this is one example, using it as is, not morphing it or altering it. And we have a couple examples for you. If we could go to the next slide. The next category was slight alterations. So it's with this category, you are altering it in some way, bending it, sharpening it, cutting it. As you'll see through Holly's example, you can, stretch it out, use it as a balloon popper. You can use it as a skewer. What else? Many examples that you see provided here in the list, and the list goes on. Next slide for the next category. Then you start to get a little more creative. So if you can, the first two were kind of functional, and we started to move into the maybe less functional and more creative, more about aesthetic, more about like bringing joy, or being a manifestation of human creation, with things like, as you'll see here, like a wire sculpture, earrings, as you saw in the other example yesterday, but here's another example of how you can really like stretch the limits. So even with one idea, such as earrings, there's multiple iterations and ways that can come up. I think that's all our live examples for this category, right, Holly?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so if we go to the next slide, that's when we really start to stretch the limits. What happens if you melt them down? Which we're not fully going to do here, but Holly provided a really good just act on that action. So if you transform it and getting a little more technical and realistic, you might have to mix it with other metals and materials to really make these things. But you can make all the things that are made of metal in this world. So you can make a tub, you can make machines, you can make a paper clipping machine. That example in the right-hand picture is actually a paperclip making machine, which can then, if you melt it down and have a paper clipping machine, you can make more paper clips with your paper clipping machine.
Super meta.
And just come and inception, and you're coming full force, right? And this is only in our kind of like quote unquote real like empirical world that we live in. There's also the imaginary world. You can fold paper clips into a chair, and maybe it's for a mini person or a mini creature or imagination. And in that realm, you can make anything that's made out of metal in real life for your imaginary world, or for your kind of like miniature world. If you want to be more quote unquote real, it could be for a dollhouse, but it could be really in your imagination for this imaginary world. You can make bridges, you can make anything that's in our world, a cane, an umbrella handle. In the imaginary world or for the miniature world, you can make things there. So if we go to the next slide,
Examples of like, being very broad. Everything's on the table. We're just brainstorming and thinking of any and all ideas. We also found ourselves wondering, like, what happens when we go deep? So we put boundaries around what we're thinking about and going and sort of asking, what's next? What's next? What's next? So imagine you are a dentist. You're actively thinking about teeth all the time. What could you imagine doing with paper clips and keeping them as is? They're like, fun vampire teeth, let's say, or adjusting it back to those categories Michaela was talking about into a toothpick, or melting it down and forming fillings and new teeth, back to the sort of the meta examples.
Thanks. Next slide. So as you can see, we kind of like went everywhere with it, to the point where it was a little overwhelming, but then again came back to, with the morphing example and putting a theme on it, you could put boundaries on it. So this kind of all gave us some time to reflect and notice that the possibilities are endless, but really like the limits for what you can do with a paperclip depend on the boundaries you put on it, the conceptual frameworks or the paradigm you're working with. Does it have to be functional? Can it be more for aesthetic or decoration or joy or expression? Can it be, morphed and remade? Is it in our real empirical world? Is it in imaginary land? It just depends the limits you put on yourself, but also maybe some limits you're given, right? Because you're trying to design something for a certain client or end user. Another lesson we learned was like, you do want more insights from others to expand the possibilities that you know about and expand your knowledge. We brainstormed, the three of us, Alexis, Holly, and I, but we also went to the internet. It's been done before. I think some presenters have shown like you don't need to be completely new with your ideas. You do want to crowdsource. You do want to build from existing wisdom. I looked up videos of like this handyman survivalist who showed like you can flatten it to make a mini flathead screwdriver. I don't have that background of using those tools that he had in his garage. I also noticed that some pictures you see are like ornament hangers and Easter egg dippers. That comes from like the American Christian tradition, which is real in the world and handy, but that's just one religious or like country tradition, right? So what would we get if we brought in more like cultural perspective? And Alexis really saw like the theme, like we had all these categories, and then she was like, well, across the categories we could add the tooth kind of boundary. So you want more people and insights and diversity of insights to expand the possibilities. And I think that's all the lessons, right, Holly? Did I miss anything?
I think you got them. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela and Holly. I know the judges are going to have a tough time deciding who the winners are going to be. We had some great stories. We had some really great commercials yesterday. So many uses for paper clips, so much creativity. So I know the judges are going to have a hard time. Thank you again. All right, so moving on forward. Now we're going to hear from Bob Johnson, who is the Director of Grants and Career Connect at West Alabama Works, and we'll hear about their project on building an innovative structure to align and coordinate resources in West Alabama.
Thank you,
Take it away, Bob.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I want to thank the National Fund for their investment into West Alabama Works for many years, also through the Innovation Fund. You guys have helped us think creatively and think innovatively. You've certainly helped me think. You've helped drive this culture of innovation farther into our organization. Let me give you a quick overview of West Alabama Works. So we are the regional workforce, the nonprofit side of the Region 3 Workforce Development Council here in Alabama. primarily a rural area, but we are in 9 counties. We're based in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, which is the home of Mercedes Manufacturing or Assembly Plant, and also the University of Alabama. Donnie Jones is our executive director, and Donnie has really carried West Alabama Works from its start in about 2014 and really drives the organization to make innovation kind of the core of everything that we do, and partnership and serving people well. Our innovation fund focused on an area that I lead, which is the Career Connect team. You can go to the next slide here, please. So the Career Connect, so that you understand, so as we explain the problem we're trying to solve here, the Career Connect process is part process where we reach out, find people, we engage with them, we assess them to move them to better jobs or back into the workforce, and we help them find employment. But it's also a software system that a funder came to us actually in about 2015 and said, we need to develop something that can track people better in our region. And we actually started the Career Connect software platform after some struggles with assessing a service industry event and working in the coal mining community. So we launched in 2015, we started in 2015, then we launched it in 2016. So let's talk about the Innovation Fund, in particular, the project that we put out and worked on. So here's the problem that we saw. We saw critical community workforce assets that were working in silos. Specifically, we looked at public libraries, DHR offices, voc rehab offices, the career one-stop centers, and community colleges. All those things working well in isolation, but not necessarily working together. And we had all these people that were involved in our process. I think at that point, we probably had about 10,000 people. And what we found is we tried to move people between those entities, that handoffs were complicated, they were time consuming, and they were frequently fumbled. It took too long and it was too complicated to work. If you think about the experience of the individuals we serve, that we're trying to help find training and find a better job, oftentimes they might go to one group who would say, you need to call the Career Center and get an appointment. And they would call the person they're supposed to, they would get voicemail, the person would call them back in 3 or 4 days, get their voicemail, they would try to call again, they would try to schedule an appointment. And before you knew it, you had 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then they weren't calling the right place and they needed to go, instead of the Career Center, they needed to go over to voc rehab. It was complicated and it was too complicated to work for these folks. So here's what we thought we would do. We wanted to create a seamless connectivity between these critical community assets and create more intersection and more alignment with the workforce ecosystem so that we could see better results, but also faster results and better outcomes, especially in training and employment. And here's how we did that. So here are the innovations or the things that we created to move this process through. The first thing we did is we manufactured, we designed, built, and put physical kiosk in the libraries, in the DHR offices, in the ADRS, which is the Alabama Department of Rehabilitative Service offices. We're about to put some in some grocery stores. We're putting one in Walmart. And these kiosks would be entry portals for people that are looking for a job or looking for training. We also, as part of that, we decided we would take our website and redesign it and provide some instant access for folks to register through phones and other devices. We put together some strong visuals to attract and differentiate what we were trying to accomplish. Another thing that we wanted to do is we've invested in developing a lot of real-time chat platforms that when you go into the website, when you go to westalabamajobs.com, for instance, you can go to the chat function and ask a question. Somebody answers right away. And if you want to take a ready to work class, we can set that up for you right there online in real time. If you're interested in getting your high school diploma through our Career Online High School program, all that can happen right there on a kiosk in the library, whether it's a rural community in West Alabama, or whether you're at a library or a career center office in Tuscaloosa. We also wanted to create a system where our navigators, which are our case managers, could set up appointments for people. So you didn't have to call to set up an appointment at the Career Center to talk about OJT. You could set that appointment up online. We also wanted to give them access to some of the resources that we put together as part of this grant. Our Career Online High School that I mentioned, we've invested because of COVID into an extensive micro-learning platform where we can do career pathways and people can explore that through a micro-learning platform, which is basically text to learn. We've also created a jobs platform. Our goal has always been to minimize the number of people that were getting lost in the process. And our bottom line is we want to be fast, people-centered, and responsive in all that we do. Next slide, please. So this will give you kind of a picture. You know, what we started with is on the left. We saw some pretty interesting design items that were being used at large trade shows in Las Vegas. Saw a kiosk and a Whole Foods, and we said, why don't we create something that will help us in workforce? And you can see what we created there. There's one of the displays, and you can also see the physical kiosk that is a computer terminal, a touch screen, that there are 21 of those spread out across our region, and people register constantly. I think we average about 25 people a day that register on the platform. Next slide, please. And this will show you a little bit of how our process evolved through the Innovation Fund. So on the left, you see kind of where we get names and where we find people through our kiosk and our website, people going in and registering, and then the services that we can offer them. And we can do that quickly in real time by responding to them through chat and through text messaging. But also our goal is always to move people into appropriate training to skill them up and help them find a better job. So all of that is done with coaching, with advocating to employers that we know are hiring. We help them with job applications. We've actually built a platform that is similar to Indeed, but it's regional, that is part of Career Connect, that we can set up their job interviews, they can do their job applications, we can get feedback from employers, and it's supported with, since COVID started, we have sent 176,000 text conversations with 14,000 individuals through this platform that we've developed. Always, the end is a living wage job with benefits. And that's kind of the overview that we've been able to simplify through a kiosk process and in a redesigned website and some of those things. Next slide, please. So Our funding partners for the project, besides the Innovation Fund, was the Appalachian Regional Commission, ARC, and the state of Alabama. But one thing I would say is the Innovation Fund, the National Fund dollars being flexible funding, has helped us fill in gaps that have developed along the way. For instance, we needed more kiosks in some of the rural counties, and we were able to do that through the flexibility that we had in the Innovation Fund. Next slide. So challenges, just like everybody that has presented. Number one was COVID. Secondly was this design and manufacturing of the display pieces, and the kiosks took a lot longer than we expected. We rolled the kiosk out in February before COVID hit in March. And you can imagine that we had some bumps at the start, putting them in public libraries, and that they were driven by a touch screen. So we had challenges at the beginning that we had to overcome. But I think our biggest challenge was aligning these traditional institutions that were so complex and so resistant to change. And that resistance was very layered and very strong. Next slide, please. Lessons we learned. First of all, our core values kept us going. Two of those values, people matter most and process is everything, really helped drive our ability to turn on a dime because of COVID hitting. Another lesson we learned is resistance to change is stronger than we ever thought it would be. Thirdly, innovation grows best in a culture of assessment, learning, improving, risk-taking, and hard work. And that has been very helpful to us as an organization. It's part of the DNA that our executive director created, but it's also helped us accomplish a lot during COVID. The other thing is that processes, the best processes for us that serve our client best are processes that make things simpler, faster, and include regular communication, coaching, answers, and reminders. And we've been able to create some pretty cool things along the way that when someone sets up an appointment, they get a series of reminders, a series of text messages, emails, and reminders all along the way. Next slide. I think, Canny, you're stepping in here.
I am going to step in. I just have a couple questions for you. Just want to make sure that we stay on time. So a couple questions, a bit of a two-parter, which is why I wanted to make sure we had time. So can you talk us more through what was happening in the community environment that you really identified the need to coordinate resources? And then what possible implications does this approach have on amplifying impact in the field of workforce development in general?
Well, I don't think silos are unique to Region 3 in West Alabama. You know, we just felt like we could be more effective if we could find some way to get all these folks that were working in their lanes to work together to create some synergy. With some of them, we've accomplished a lot. I think this is going to be a process, though, that's going to take us many years to get some folks that prefer silos to work in synergy.
Thank you. And then in terms of impact to the field, in terms of just amplifying impact in general, what does really like coordinating those resources do for impact?
Well, you know, if you had time to kind of peek under the hood of how we move people, we've used some basic technology to move people from interest to appointment to reminders and follow up and tracking. We've been able to do that in a week or 2 weeks time. And I think a lot of workforce organizations find that the people we serve, a lot of them are getting lost along the way, and they're missing appointments, and they're missing opportunities because of that. So I think there's broad general application that other folks could take technology like this and say, hey, yeah, I could use this platform and make that happen.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. All right, that covers it for our first cohort of Innovation Fund grantees. Thank you all so much for all your hard work on your projects and in presenting in general. And now I'm going to pass it over to Caroline Corona, Program Associate at the National Fund for Workforce Solutions. And she's going to walk us through a panel discussion with our second cohort of Innovation Fund grantees who are innovating for the future. Caroline.
Great, thanks, Canny. So yeah, over the past 2 days, you all have heard from our first round of Innovation Fund grantees. And then for the second cohort, we focused the grant specifically on the service sector. So we can go to the next slide. So just a quick overview of this grant round. Grantees received funding to test and implement ideas and strategies that address workforce issues in the service sector specifically, which we had originally defined as mostly retail, but when these funds were available, it was the height of the pandemic. So a lot of retail and food service firms were either completely shut down or operating at extremely limited capacity, which made them very difficult to work with. So we expanded the definition to the service super sector more broadly, which includes retail and food service, but also healthcare, financial services, transportation, distribution and logistics, education, IT, utilities, and more. Any service providing industry, really. Of course, it's no secret that the service sector had its own set of unique workforce challenges before the pandemic, and many of those challenges were made even worse by COVID-19. So this work is actually part of our broader portfolio of service sector programs as we seek to rebuild the sector with better jobs and more equity. The selected grantees for this cohort were Cleveland and Philadelphia, which you'll hear from shortly. And to give you an idea of where they're at in the work, the grant period started in July of 2020, and it will go until January of 2022. So they're pretty much in the middle of testing their ideas now. So you'll get kind of a preview and high-level overview of what they're currently working on. So if we go to the next slide, I can go ahead and introduce our two speakers. So first we have Sarah Hutton with the United Way of Greater Philadelphia and Southern New Jersey. She will share more about BankWorks, which is a training program for in-demand jobs in the financial services sector. And then after her presentation, Bashara Addison will follow with the Fund for Our Economic Future in Cleveland, Ohio. And she will share more about a new outreach strategy that partners workforce institutions with community-based organizations. So I will pass it over to Sarah.
Hello, so as Caroline mentioned, I will be presenting today on the BankWorks program, which is one of the programs supported by the Job Opportunity Investment Network that is powered by United Way. So you can go to the next slide. So this program is a partnership with Philadelphia OIC and Philadelphia Works. BankWorks is actually a national model. It's an 8-week training program, and it gives graduates the skills needed to become qualified candidates for a variety of jobs in the financial services industry. The focus is on low-income candidates who can eventually earn high-demand jobs with an average starting wage of at least $14.41 per hour is the goal. This program was considered innovative because of its focus on low-income and minority candidates, its previous job placement success and starting salary success. And as far as the 3 different types of innovation that the National Fund likes to focus on, we initially considered this a form of extending because this program did exist in one form before this partnership, but as with COVID, as I'm sure everyone would agree, it eventually kind of turned into an adapting type of innovation. So we've kind of been doing a little bit of both. You can go to the next slide. So as I said, this project has existed in Philadelphia since 2017. But this funding has allowed for a lot of new enhancements, which have included a stronger focus on racial equity, launching a financial services industry advisory board, and some flexibility for the course itself to be done in a hybrid format during COVID-19. And this has included actually providing the technology to the students who did not previously own their own or have the digital literacy needed to complete this program virtually. Also, this has allowed OIC to kind of spend some time looking ahead and engaging in a bit more future planning and goal setting than they would have otherwise been able to. And they have a mentorship program in development right now that hopefully will launch before the end of the calendar year. And they're also looking at how to support continued job advancement beyond that initial entry-level role, kind of how to help those previous graduates get the next job in the field. Next slide, please. So the challenges, as everyone's mentioned so far, COVID caused a lot of our challenges. Due to COVID, the first cohort of the program was delayed. So we had hoped to have 4 cohorts done by this time, and instead they've had 3. So thankfully we've still been able to hold the majority of them. We did also have to decrease the cohort size due to the social distancing guidelines. The number of people who could safely be in the room went from 20 to 12. As I said, the program is running in a hybrid format, so they're not in person all the time, but when they are, we do need to be mindful of room size and distancing and all of that. And as I mentioned before, initially students were not really prepared to complete this program in a hybrid capacity, and some funds kind of unexpectedly had to be spent providing them with the necessary technology. Next slide, please. As far as what we've learned so far, we have been seeing a lot of success with this program. We have learned that when students are provided the technology and a little bit of help using it when needed, they're definitely able to have success in the program and in the field in general. Hiring in the industry has not slowed down as much as we initially feared that it would. The jobs might look a little different. Some might be more remote, but it has not, slowed down as much as we worried. So of the 31 that have enrolled so far, 27 have completed, which is higher than our completion rate goal. 12 students just graduated last week. I actually was able to attend the virtual graduation. It was really special and really nice to be part of. So we haven't tracked their job placement rates yet, but of the 15 previous graduates, they've had 100% job placement rate, which we're very excited about. And the 12 new graduates have started their phone interviews and done virtual hiring fairs and stuff like that. So that's looking really promising for them too. And their average starting salary has been $17 an hour, which is higher than the $14.41 goal. So we are excited about what's been accomplished so far and what is to come. And then I think that's my last slide. You can go to the next.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I will pass it over to Bishara.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bishara Addison, and I am the Director of Job Preparation for the Fund for Economic Future in Northeast Ohio. The fund is a philanthropic alliance serving Northeast Ohio. We have an 18-county footprint, and it's focused on using pooled dollars to invest in the areas of job creation, job access, and job preparation. And I am here today to share some creative efforts in our community to recruit talent and market for technical training. So if you go to the next slide. The problem of practice that our project is working to solve for is that there are too few Black and Latinx residents enrolling in technical training, especially for in-demand careers in the service sector, as well as careers in IT and manufacturing. So thus, our collaborative outreach project is testing a menu of approaches to attract, enroll, and place Black and Latinx residents into in-demand careers. We have project subgrantees, and they developed ideas to bridge the unique outreach techniques of community-based organizations to attract and enroll residents into the existing training programs that we have. We have 4 sub-grantees, and each is using a very different approach. The first is a pilot for a neighborhood hotline, and the aim is making access points to training more proximate. Another is a mentorship program that is really building the trainee social capital to improve retention rates in training programs. Another is focused on resource navigation and outreach, so engaging in deliberate outreach and barrier removal for job and trainee candidates. And finally, the last is focused on career navigation, where partners are bolstering career coaching for enrollment, as well as while individuals are enrolled in training with 2 core training partners. Our grant goal is to enroll about 80 Black and Latinx residents across the pilots and training programs, and training for us is broadly defined. Next slide. As it relates to the National Fund and their co-investment support, the beauty of flexible funding from the National Fund in this case was that it allowed for a more user-centered design process approach, or to at least to use approaches driven by providers, rather than providers responding or fitting their ideas in an already tailored box. It also catalyzed further investment from local philanthropic partners, and it filled gaps and accelerated work that was already in motion. Our total project budget on our end is about $175,000, which means the initial flexible $50,000 from the National Fund yielded an additional $125,000. And that's what makes flexible funding so important for this work. Next slide. In terms of challenges, as with all projects, there's going to be challenges, particularly when you're trying something new. And I can think of 4 challenges that were especially pertinent, at least on the on-ramp to our execution. We're in the implementation phase right now. In hindsight, I wish we had started sooner to find supplemental investors for each of the projects seeded with funding from the National Fund and the Fund for Economic Future, which we provided a match. I wish that we had started sooner so that we could bolster the support and give more comfort and wiggle room for our providers. I think that if they had had more funding on the onset, they would have been able to dream a little bit more. Another is around seating control. So when you're removing guardrails and letting providers innovate, you're also giving folks opportunity to win or learn, and that's a reference to one of the presenters from yesterday, and allow them to make modifications as they go along, which means sometimes we're not going to necessarily achieve the goals that we set out, but we're going to learn along the way, and that's just as important. I'd also say that we're facing the similar engagement challenges as the rest of the workforce system around the country due to the remote nature of outreach techniques that we had to use in the last year or so. It's been difficult to be able to execute that way that we wanted to, but fortunately our projects will last through the transition of us opening back up. And so I think we'll see in the data an uptick and more success with these approaches. And finally, I'll say that we're also experiencing non-workforce system pressures around transportation and especially childcare. I'd argue that we're getting ready to face a severe childcare crisis in our community that definitely requires our attention. Next slide. As for lessons learned, one of the things that I would say that we learned was that contracting the right technical assistance expertise is really important. We tried a one-size-fits-all approach, and that did not work for our grantees. One of the products we were hoping to deliver on this grant was a common set of tools or playbook that could be shared. And we found that was unworkable due to the unique setup of each of our pilots. Differentiation is really essential here. And so in hindsight, I think we would have done that differently. And I would also say that startup takes time, particularly since each of our micro pilots involves multiple partners. And so actually giving room for partners to build a collaborative space and trust is really important. And the timeline hasn't necessarily allowed for us to do that as well as I think we would have liked. Next slide. If we're looking ahead, one of the things that our grantees and our micropilots have asked for and we're committed to is really building a community of learning for all of the different pilots and providers involved. We plan to share best practices that we've learned with the broader Northeast Ohio provider community in our network. And then we also believe that there's local opportunities for replication and scale. One of the projects, we already have a community college that is committed to continuing the partnership. They've already kind of built this work into their annual budget. In Cleveland, there's an opportunity to expand to other neighborhoods using local investment dollars. And another pilot, there's a broader community effort happening, and the flexible funding that we used is really just filling a gap. And finally, one of our projects that is really looking at social capital is testing an approach that I believe we can scale and replicate in lots of other communities, and not just for Northeast Ohio, but I think it would be of interest to workforce providers, particularly community workforce providers across the country. So we're really enjoying and excited about this work. Most of our projects are just now launching, and we have a fourth one that we recently have decided to fund. And so their execution hasn't started yet, but each one is promising. And I think each one will yield some very interesting learnings and insights. All right, that's it for me. I think that's my last slide.
Great. Thank you. So now we'll move into a brief Q&A with both Bashara and Sarah. And so the first question that I have is that we've seen in our network, and we've heard the past couple of days from other presenters, that COVID has caused countless disruptions in the way that the organizations in our network do their work. But it has also led to innovation in how a lot of these services are delivered, such as expanding virtual and remote options, which can really help with accessibility, providing more digital services, things like that. And we've seen that a lot of other collaboratives are planning to keep some of these changes and innovations in place, even when it's no longer needed after the pandemic. So has COVID led to any changes in your projects that you hope to or plan to keep post-COVID?
I'll jump in and answer this in two parts. I would say that providers who are participating in these projects have innovated in their own ways. One, particularly on the workforce side, is really blending digital literacy into workforce programs, as well as making sure that supportive services are bolstered. Another observation that one of our pilots has seen is that job seekers are nervous about encountering workplaces with people that don't look like them. And this is kind of creating a sense of unease on the part of some of our navigators and encouraging job seekers to connect with certain industries that where the demographics don't necessarily mirror the folks that we're trying to recruit. I find that navigators are ideal for helping job seekers understand the opportunities and kind of dispel some of these myths. So it's an opportunity, but it also means we've got to raise the value of helping employers develop inclusive workplaces. It's not totally COVID related, but I think we all know we experienced twin pandemics. The coronavirus was also a reawakening for some about the impact of systemic racism on work, health, and wealth, or the social determinants of work. And so I would say that job quality, which definitely has a racial equity impact if done well, has kind of elevated through this pandemic, and is also a recruitment tool because more individuals are interested in working in higher quality jobs.
I would say for us, as I mentioned in my presentation, we did not anticipate having to purchase technology for the students and that type of thing, but we've seen a lot of success with that. And I hope that that is an element of the program that will continue, because I do think a lot of the jobs in that sector will remain at least partially remote. So the better access that we can get them to start, hopefully once they have a job, the job would provide the technology, but even just the interview process is moving more remote and things like that. So to be able to help them with that access and that digital literacy, I think is going to be a really important component of the program. As far as whether the classes themselves will remain hybrid, I think that's going to depend on the students. We actually have quite a lengthy wait list at this point for future enrollees. So I can see possibly doing like an in-person cohort and a virtual cohort or something like that, down the road. But I think they're going to take the cue from the students in those ways, because we want to prepare them for the workforce, but we also want them to have the class experience that works best for them. So I think some pieces will definitely remain moving forward. Others, we'll have to see how it goes, but we've definitely appreciated the flexible funding and the chance to innovate a little bit, especially in all this unexpected stuff going on.
Absolutely, thank you. And Canny, I believe we're moving into more general questions, correct?
Yes, so we're doing a general Q&A session for all of the collaborative presenters. So Emily, Bob, Sarah, and Bashara. Emily, I got a couple questions in the chat for you. Could you speak a little bit more about what exactly the CCSA role is and how sensitive is the business case to state and local policy environments?
Yeah, absolutely. So the CCSA role specifically, like I had talked about, it's an advanced role for a home health aide that acts as a bridge between what's happening in a client's home and the client's care team. So the idea is that the CCSA will be working actively within the client's home with the client's home health aide, and any family caregivers that are in the home. So they're working to not only coach and support that home health aide, but they themselves are also making observations. So they're working closely there. But then, like I said, sort of the really special component here is that we're breaking down the barriers that have traditionally existed between direct care workers and something like a care team. And this is the whole crux of the advanced role, is developing the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that the CCSA needs, but also the care team needs, because we have a care team training as well, to help fully integrate that CCSA role into the care team as a fully respected and appreciated member of that care team. And by making that connection, we're helping to increase the communication between the client's home and the care team so that more proactive action can happen to help prevent very expensive, costly, adverse health events. And so that's something that is going to really propel an agency's ability to generate that financial return, because in a lot of payment systems, they're rewarded and incentivized to be able to provide that sort of preventative care. And Canny, can you remind me about the second part of the question?
Yes, the second part was, how sensitive is the business case to state and local policy environments?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. They are intrinsically linked. So, and I'm sorry, my dog is here. So if you see these hand motions, that's what's happening. So they are very closely connected. And it's because whenever we're having conversations with statewide coalitions, with advocates, with policymakers, okay, understandably, they want to understand, what is the return on investment here? What do we already know about this strategy and how it's impacting consumers' experience, how it's impacting and stabilizing the workforce? And if we don't have that evidence, if we haven't developed the business case, if we can't point to tangible, measurable data, how are we going to convince them to invest in these types of strategies? And so that's why at PHI, we have both the practice and the policy side, because they both need to work together in order for us to make change on a systemic level.
Thank you, Emily.
And Canny, I believe we got a question for Sarah in the chat, right? Okay, yeah, so the question we received for you, Sarah, is what are the types of roles for which the BankWorks graduates have been hired for in the financial services industry?
So it has varied a little bit, but I would say the most common has probably been customer service roles so far. A lot of the students have, some have children, like some are caring for parents, like they have a lot of responsibilities in their lives. So those roles have been helpful because they tend to be different shifts, throughout the day and evening, and not just strictly like the traditional 9 to 5, so to speak. So that's where a lot of them have come. Some that had, you know, maybe a little bit of prior experience in a somewhat related field do enter into something that's a little bit more like finance focused, but that's kind of what I had mentioned they were looking at doing for the next round of supports, like looking at how to advance them further in that field, even if it is in the customer service path, you know, how to become a manager, how to, you know, just make sure that they're always striving for the next thing. So we are definitely looking into that now, but that's been the most common so far. It's really been across the board though.
Great. Bob, I have another question for you. So to what degree was thinking about access really at the forefront for you all when developing this project and those kiosks?
I think access was really a primary driver for us because we work with more at-risk individuals. 88% of the people we serve are Black, 60% are female, and access is limited in rural areas. So we want to take it rather than telling people who don't have cars they need to drive to an appointment. We want to try to take it to them. So access was primary.
Thank you, Bob. And just a general question for all of our grantees chime in. From your experience, what does it take to really fuel and nurture innovation? What needs to be true for an innovative culture or an innovative idea to thrive?
Kenny, I can jump in. This is Bashara. I think to nurture and fuel the development, really in testing kind of innovation, one, you want to have the ability to dream and think about what's possible. You want to have an outcomes focused mindset. So what do we want to achieve? And then planning backwards on how we actually get there, but actually have the freedom to dream on what the outcome should be. And then also, which is true for all of us here today, is that you need flexible resources for execution because you don't actually always know what's going to change or what modifications need to be made as you're engaging in innovation. Even if you know what your North Star is, you still need room to make modifications. And so flexible resources is really important to be able to do that.
I would also just add a willingness to just pivot unexpectedly and let things change as they need to change. You know, when they realized that the students didn't have access to technology, it wasn't like, well, let's just expand the program from 8 weeks to 16 and do socially distanced in-person learning the whole time to accommodate that. It was, no, let's like buy this for them, which wasn't, you know, maybe wasn't the initial plan, but it's what worked better, not just for the program, but for their future success. So I think just being willing to adapt and make changes unexpectedly, I think is really important.
Great, thank you. Bob, we have another question for you. Could you say more about your innovation? Was there a new tech tool developed, or was it more the idea of getting the kiosks into the community to access their website?
Yeah. So we did overhaul our technology. We moved from a kind of a boring form to an API-driven site. All of our information goes into our database. And here's what we did. We stole well, still's not the word. We utilized technology that's out in the market and we adapted it via an API. And so we studied what was being used in HR with text platform, and we didn't create a new platform. We went and used that and put it in an API. This calendar program, there's a couple of them that we use. So we researched and we made good choices, I think, because cost is always an issue. We don't have a big technology budget.
Thanks. So I have a question for both Sarah and Bishara and whoever else maybe wants to jump in as well. When we think about the three types of innovation, both of yours seem to fit into the extend or adapt phases. So I'd love to just hear, in your eyes, what is the value of investing in extending or adapting current work? And again, anyone else can jump in as well.
I'll jump in. I think we definitely were in the extend category. And I think it's because the flexible funding allowed us to look at existing work, infrastructure, and ideas and create a bridge between disconnected resources. So there was already a lot of existing infrastructure within community-based organizations to connect with residents. They just weren't connecting with residents around careers. There's already a lot of great workforce programs, and we can develop the best training in the world. But if you don't have people enrolling in those programs, then the training is just there. And so the flexible funding was glue, or helped us knit together some disconnected assets that together, actually, we believe, we're placing a bet that it will increase enrollment, particularly for our target populations of Black and Latinx.
And I would add that I think the value in investing in that type of innovation, I think, lies in the fact that you're able to build upon some lessons that have already been learned. Not that there's not, a lot of value in investing in something brand new as well, but I think in our case, this program existed in some form. It had seen success, arguably, more success than the average similar program, but we were able to take lessons that had already been learned, build upon the things that were good, do less of the things that maybe weren't as good, and really bring the right people to the table, and just add in really important features and programming around racial equity, around the advisory services board, and that stuff that would not have happened, without funding like this. So I think you're able to take programming that already might be going fairly well, but just really bring it to the next level and serve the community in the best way possible.
Great, thank you all. One final question for all of you. If looking back, cohort 1, what would you have done differently, if anything? Do you have any advice for cohort 2? Cohort 2 also, where in your work are you now, in the sense of how have you pivoted post-pandemic? How have you needed to pivot, et cetera?
I'll start. So I feel like I really appreciated both how the participants yesterday talked about a willingness to either win or learn, or just be comfortable with the concept of failure. I know we might not be calling it failure, but and Bishara, sort of what you were talking about too, of just having a lot of agreement and understanding within the organization and willingness to dream and think outside the box. And I think what comes up for me in thinking about your question, Canny, and reflecting back on our work, is that I think if I could rewind the tape and do this all over again, to work with my colleagues and our team to really build a shared culture and understanding of what that meant for us. Because when we were going into this, we were figuring it out as we went, and we landed in a place where, yes, we knew we had to innovate. We had to do things that felt uncomfortable because they were different than how we'd done them before. But having those conversations, having those intentional conversations as a team to develop that shared culture, I think would have helped even, smooth the road as it is, and sort of jumpstart that innovative thinking, that dreaming, that willingness to fail even sooner in the process.
I would just echo what Sarah said, what Emily just said, is I really think it's more about culture and values and being versus doing. And it's that age-old wrestling. How do we change? Is it doing things or inside out? And COVID has been terrible for our country, but it caused us to innovate or die. And so we kind of had an advantage because you couldn't do it the way you were going to do it, you know? So, and I don't want to stop innovating that way.
Something that Bob said that really resonated for me is really kind of meeting people where they are. What I love about the projects that are being tested in Northeast Ohio is that they're really trying to create greater proximity. But I still think that there's more work to do, particularly around scale. And if I could kind of go back in time, I would be thinking about, and I think I mentioned this earlier, of really pairing a local investor for each of the projects so that their ability to dream about what's possible is broader. Because I know that they were working within the constraints of dollars that we had. And even though there was flexibility because we weren't prescriptive, like literally they're proposing to us what they want to do. And then we're like, go forth. I wish I could have seeded that a little bit more. And we lucked out that we had a local investor who was willing to add some additional resources to 2 of our projects. But intentionality on our end to at least pair everyone with that opportunity is something that I would probably do differently. And also, like the other kind of speakers here today, the pandemic has created some interesting opportunities. So everyone realizes that we've really got to work on digital access. And we know that that's a complicated infrastructure to address. The same thing around childcare, the same thing around transportation. And so instead of looking in hindsight, what I hope we can do going forward is not lose momentum around how pressures on other ecosystems outside of workforce are actually having direct workforce impacts, and how we can also be better advocates for the partners that are working on those issues.
All right, thank you, everyone. And now for the much awaited announcement of the innovation competition winners. Jordan, I'll believe you're announcing. Drum roll.
Yeah, I'm happy to close us out on a high note, celebrating the great projects from the National Fund. So we had all really great contestants in this project, and we loved all of them, but there were a couple that just rose to the top. You know, from the paperclip challenge, we really loved the play per clip group, even though that name is very hard to say. So I believe that is the team of Cami, Andrea, and Tom. Congratulations. Yay. Woo. And yes, take a bow. And then for the dictionary story challenge, we really loved Team Carolyn, Kelly, and Michelle. So snaps to everyone. It was all great. Special props for the group with the Greek tragedy challenge that was very confusing, but very good. Good job reading. We loved all of it. Thanks, Al.
Thank you so much. Everybody has been an incredible couple of days. Time has just flown by. I hope we all have learned a lot. We've really thought about what innovation means on the ground. We've thought about what innovation means in terms of a creative exercise. And really, I hope everyone walks away with innovation being and creativity being more a process and a mindset rather than a formula to follow. So thank you to all of our grantees for all of their hard work. And also thank you for the team on the back end. We've got Josh Enoch on the back end on comms, Janice Urbanik and Michelle Wilson and Caroline Corona. And we have just been working so hard, and we hope you all have enjoyed the Innovation Fund Showcase. We'll also be following up with some more follow-up materials. I know that some of the projects were really interesting and you all want to dive in deeper, so we'll be following up with contact information and any follow-up materials. All right, thank you all for joining us.